Very, very welcome to another episode of the Mighty Mini Podcast. Can I just say at the outset, which I always do, thank you so much for the kind emails, the encouragement. Sometimes in life, particularly when you're sitting in a room on your own, talking to a microphone and coming up with mad ideas, sometimes you doubt your own sanity. And honestly, it's lovely to get, even the smallest bit of encouragement or positivity. We've had some amazing people on the podcast so far. I think, anyone who listened to my last guest talk about losing her husband on her honeymoon would be, I suppose, shocked and saddened, but also inspired at her strength and her dignity and her ability. And you'd say, how would you top Zoe Holohan? So I've got an equally inspirational woman with me here today. I have to say, Mary Lou McDonald, you're very, very welcome to the podcast, first of all.
Thanks so much, Anda.
And the other problem is, for the last 5 or 6 days, I suppose 5 or 6 weeks, I've been hunting you down. Your work ethic is off the scale, as is poor Emer, and I hope she listens to this at some stage. But she was extremely patient and kept trying to find a slot for me to speak to you. So it's lovely to speak to you. I had a serious problem with the introduction to this because every inch of me wants to say, well, hello, Mary Lou. And I know that's wrong. And I know.
But, listen, do it. Don't. Everyone else does. Why should you be any different? And are you going to sing to me? Is the question.
No, not at all. Not at all. If I do, that's the end of the podcast. I have some talents, but singing isn't one of them. Actually, and the reason that Hello, Mary Lou came to mind is I saw a lovely clip on Facebook when you were canvassing in Dublin Bay South. And there was a lovely lady in her front garden and she sang Hello, Mary Lou to you. My first question, Mary Lou, and I can tell you all of these questions are based on conversations I had with people. So I'd say to someone, a few weeks ago I had Michael Healy-Rae on, and when I said it to friends and family, I said, that fella, and then they proceed, you know what you should ask him? So what you should ask him is the foundation, or do you know what you should ask her as the foundation of the podcast? The really obvious first question is, where did Mary Lou come from? Was it an aunt, a granny, or was it just a name your parents liked?
Yeah, well, listen, that's it. Firstly, I should say to you, and that woman, that lovely woman singing to me is Lily.
Right.
And she's a great woman. They are Stubbs make the finest of fine singers, well, except me. She's great crack. And I have to tell you, I have spent my entire life being serenaded by different people. Song. I mean, it's like the soundtrack to my life. So the name, where did it come from? My full title is Mary Louise.
All right.
That's what it's called. So certainly as a child, if I was in trouble, I got my whole title. The way the blood would run cold in my veins if my mother uttered the 2 words Mary Louise. I knew I was
come into the sitting room, Mary Louise, you're in trouble.
Oh dear. But the name itself, my grandmother was Mary, although known as Molly. Right. I was born on May Day in 1969, for full disclosure.
Well, you never ask a lady her age or her weight. I know that. You never ask those things.
So anyway, so hence Mary, because I was born on May Day. And then I've never actually gotten a proper explanation from my mother as to Mary Louise, Mary Lou, but she liked it. She worked in Aer Lingus, my mammy, before she was married, and she had a colleague called Mary Lou Nally. She always told me, and she always just liked the whole Mary Lou thing, and she obviously liked this person that she worked with. So that's it. That's the story behind the name. It's nothing more elaborate or intriguing than that, but it's certainly a name that has aroused various reactions when I was a kid. When people would tease you, particularly boys, particularly friends of my brothers, they'd go Mary Lou, L-O-O, as in insinuating, a toilet aspect.
Yeah. Listen, when you grow up in Ireland, being called Enda, you get it, and.
I can imagine.
At least we don't have a song, Enda, but I do always relate to, that Johnny Cash, A Boy Named Sue, the fellow who's always fighting in school because people made fun of his name. So I can relate to that. I was telling some American relations of ours, that Enda is Aina, like the birds, and my youngest is Fionn because he's blonde, and I'm married to Maeve, and we have a Clodagh and an Oisin in our house. And someone was slagging me and said, geez, you nearly have the whole storybook. And I said, well, I love the meaning. Like Oisin means the little deer or fawn, and our family crest is a stag. And this fellow was slagging me. He said, God, you're like the Apache Indians. He said, you have, 2 wolves on a mountain. Everything has meaning. But I said, yeah, that's the nice thing about the language and about meaning. Mary Lou, can I ask you, like, So when I do my legal stalking before an interview for someone, I actually got a headache looking at your social media feed in the last few days. Like, mother of God, it is non-stop. Is it very hard to have that many hats? Like the hats, and these are the hats I know of. So president of Sinn Féin, leader of the opposition, a TD, which is a world of work on its own, mammy, partner, friend, brother, sister. Like, is that press behind you full of hats? How do you actually manage to juggle from one to the other?
Well, the answer to that is it depends. I mean, there's times in my life where everything just clicks along swimmingly well. And I love the work that I do. I love my activism. I love being out and about. And my social media feed in recent days will show to you that I have been in, well, where haven't I been? I've been in Clare, I've been in Limerick, I've been in Kerry, I've been in Cork, I've been in Wicklow, I've been in Kildare, I've been everywhere. I haven't been to Waterford yet. I need to make a return trip. So I've been out on the road, but I love that because firstly, I just enjoy the kind of the energy and the buzz and the company and the good humor and the challenge sometimes of meeting up with people. Just as a human experience, I'm that kind of person. But secondly, in the roles that I carry as a political leader, as a political activist, the best way to check whether or not things are working, what's working, what's not, what needs to change, where the public mood and view is, what the public ambitions are, is to actually go out and talk to people. And Irish people are funny, like we can be quite guarded and, polite, or, we can adopt the thing as, whatever you say nothing kind of approach. But my experience is if you go and ask people what they think on something or what they want to see happening, people will tell you. And that's really, really important. And I know those of you who aren't blessed like me to be a Dubliner, not everyone folks can wear that mantle, but I'm very conscious as a Dub that there's a sense that, the world begins and ends in Dublin, and, and sometimes I think that can be true when it comes to political decision making. So I think it's doubly important for me as a Dubliner to get outside of the city and county and to get into the Midlands and go up to the Northwest and down to the south.
I saw you were.
I mean, and those trips are incredible because it gives you a real clarity of what's happening, but it re-energizes my sense of purpose because I'm in political activism because I believe, and I firmly believe, that we can change people's lives, that we can change Ireland. I actually think we can change the world, but we just have to work really hard at it. So that's what keeps me going every day. And then as to kind of like being mom and being a wife and a partner and all of that, some of that, to be honest with you, I've juggled, I've improvised, I've done what every working mother, every working parent, I think does. And you know what you do? You do your best. That's what I think. You just do your best.
You adapt. I think for me, family keeps me very grounded sometimes. Like I often describe myself as minus 70 Z list. I'm not even on the Z list, but I did a podcast there a few years back for Jarlath O'Regan on Irishman Abroad. I was delighted to be asked, and I accidentally left the iPad open on the kitchen table because he had Bono on before me, and he had I think Sonia O'Sullivan, and I was like, oh my God, I've arrived, But I remember my kids looked at it and they said, why does he want to talk to you, Dad? Like what? Like what the hell? What's wrong with him? And it's great. It's great like that you can get super grounded. Or I had a book out at Christmas. It's called I'm Fine, about my own struggles from alcoholism and mental health. But my kids went and did their own version of the book cover with all of our dogs' faces on the book cover, and that sort of genuine affection and lack of respect keeps me grounded. Do you get that in your house? Do you get told, listen, Mom, you're not in the doll now?
Oh, completely. I absolutely. In fact, my husband's friends, his work friends, slag him. They'd be watching me in the doll and they'd be saying, go for it. And then they say, oh, Jesus, does she come home? Does she carry on like that? And Martin, my husband's like, yeah, she's got a soapbox. She gets up on it and says, wherefore I therefore put it to you. No, Mary, there's no standing on ceremony in our family. Our home is a happy one, you know, for the most part. Like, we're no different to any family. You have your moments, you have your challenges, but like there is no difference. And when I am at home and when I close the door, I am mammy.
Yeah.
I am wife. And they'd be very quick now. If they thought I was losing the run of myself for a second, they'd be very quick to bring me right down to earth. But isn't that what makes that's
family.
And the intimacy of family and very close friends, that they keep you grounded and keep your eye on and kind of the important things. And also, because my work can be very, very consuming and it can be very demanding, just time-wise, energy-wise, you have to have an off button. And when you have moments where you can't hit that off button, very often people who love you will hit the off button for you. And we should be really grateful for that. So that's part and parcel of the whole mix. And I love that. Like, my kids would, you know, if I start talking, they'll be la, 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 you know, make her stop. And they have their own ideas, by the way, and in terms on life and politics, and we've always encouraged that. We're not into kind of brainwashing our kids like they have, except that they, I hope, have the values of equality, a sense of, you know, fairness, a sense of freedom, a sense of fun, those kind of things that our kind of family life is built on. And then beyond that, they have their own ideas, I can tell you, on pretty much everything.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. We have, you know, I said very early on in parenthood to my wife, I said, we'll give them absolutely anything they need, but we expect absolutely everything in return. And I suppose while academically they've been very successful, what I'm most proud of my kids, my two grown-ups particularly, is that they're really solid people. You know, they're good people. They can have they have a good sense of value, and they can smile, and they have a bit of life to them. It's good, you know. I remember, Mary Lou, right back at the start of lockdown 1, early on in COVID, and you know, you were Mary Lou the politician, but when COVID struck and COVID arrived to your own home, I remember thinking, bloody heck, there's a politician. You know, you talk about experiencing reality on the ground. There's a politician who's going to be able to talk about COVID because they've had it in their house. And then I did know from past reading that you had asthma and that you'd had difficulties with breathing in the past. How much of a shocker was that? And you know, trying to deal with that right at the start of the pandemic.
Well, when it happened, what happened initially was that one of the first cases of this virus occurred in my kids' school. Right. So we were actually in lockdown a week or maybe 10 days, well ahead of everyone else. Now, I didn't get the virus from that channel, but it just goes to show you that we had been ahead of the posse. We were super careful, very thoughtful, very aware of this virus and its dangers, and I had very limited contact with colleagues or friends. I was only in a very limited number of places, and yet I managed to contract the thing. And at the time, we had been tracking it. You remember, it was in Wuhan, the poor Chinese. Then all of a sudden it was in Italy, and northern Italy was devastated. Do you recall? I mean, it was completely shocking. And then all of a sudden it's in the school, and then it's in your house, and it's in your body. And I found it a very difficult experience. I mean, I was sick. Now, let me emphasize, I was not nearly as sick as others, and I was strong enough, fit enough, healthy enough to fight it off. I wasn't hospitalized. And I'm so conscious when I'm talking about this to really emphasize that so many others were sicker, and so many people lost the battle with COVID, and people are bereaved yet and brokenhearted yet for the loss of their loved ones. That fortunately was not the story in my house. But even being sick at that level, like at home and isolating and fighting the thing off, it was just a bizarre and actually kind of terrorizing experience, because it was like you became part of this big international narrative around this awful virus for which we had no treatment, no immunity, and so on. And when I was sick, it was at that time where, like, the body count, particularly in northern Italy, was utterly, utterly devastating. And so in a strange way, you felt yourself as an individual part of that bigger story.
Yeah.
So it was frightening. The virus itself is horrific. I know some people get infected with it and have no symptoms or mild symptoms, but I mean, so many other people, and not just older people, or not just people with underlying conditions, really suffered with that virus. It is not a hoax, folks. You know, this is very real.
Yeah.
So I'm just really relieved to come out the fire.
It really resonated. I mean, I remember at that thinking, oh my God, like, you're a mommy, you had your babies, and they'll always be your babies. They'll be in their 60s and they'll still be your babies, but your babies were sick, you're at home. It was a shocker thing. Do you know, it strikes me, Mary Lou, that you rarely get angry. I've seen you get angry when you lose the plot, when you get angry, it seems to be about particularly inequality, and it seems to be a really important value to you. I was fascinated that it didn't get much coverage in the national media, but you recently celebrated Eid in Croke Park, and I listened to what you had to say about inclusion in Ireland, and I think too, you know, I do see that like I'm of a generation that, you know, I had friends who were gay, but it was illegal. You went to jail in Ireland, you know, you could be arrested for it, and I'm lovely, you know, in the lovely position to have seen Ireland of the 80s evolve and change. How important is inclusion to you in terms of as a value that you want to live by?
Entirely, it's absolutely central, and it's, for me, it's not some kind of abstract intellectual value. It's a real lived human value. I mean, for me, the real value of living a full life, and a life of excitement and challenge and real fulfillment, is all about inclusion. It's about stretching your boundaries. It's about allowing for the other. It's about respecting the other. It's about loving the other, understanding the other or not. Yeah. And to me, that's absolutely central. I don't want to live in kind of a monochrome world. I want to live in a world that's full of colour and difference. And I want people to be respected. I want for others that which I would demand for myself as a woman. Yeah. I am not better than, I am not more than, but I can tell you this, I'm not worse than, and I'm not less than, and I won't be that. And for generations, bear in mind, women of all backgrounds were seen as kind of second class, lesser than. I mentioned my mum earlier on. My mother worked at a time that when you got married, there was the marriage bar, and you weren't allowed work. I mean, for someone of my generation, that's like unthinkable. But for my daughter's generation, there's uproar at the question. And yet, that was her grandmother, and her grandmother's now, what, my mum's 75. She won't mind me saying I'm revealing all of our ages today. But so yes, that's hugely important. And when I was growing up, I mean, one of the thing I think that was placed at the greatest premium in our house wasn't kind of dogmatism or perfection or even excellence in achievement. Yeah. The real premium thing in our household was to be broad-minded, to be open-minded. And I am so grateful for the fact that I was raised with that as the central driving kind of value piece. Not in a preachy, judgmental way, but just as a matter that this is a good thing to be. And it's what I've tried to encourage in my own kids, and it's how I insist on living. So I want to know traveller people, settled people, gay people, straight people, bi people, trans people, black people, white people, green people, orange people, you know, of all varieties, because that's what gives your life a dynamic. I would never understand a life that's lived within a box or a category that you were born into, and you never stray from it. Yeah. And you never take a chance, and you never see yourself from the outside, or you never experience others. So for me, that inclusion piece, for me personally, is absolutely central to how I experience life. I think that's why I enjoy meeting people so much, because that's part of my whole mentality and values. And then I think for our society, I mean, it's non-negotiable that we are all equal, and that we have rights, and that those rights are recognized and respected. And I think that's how we will build a really, really great society. And I love our country. I think we are I love our people. I think we have so much going for us. We have achieved so much. We have so much talent and goodness and ingenuity. And I think if we can manage to hardwire that inclusivity piece in a way that we mean it, and in a way that finds expression through our political system and our social system, we will be like world leaders in pretty much everything. You make yourself unbeatable, just unbeatable, when you embrace that. You make yourself defeated and demoralized if you reject inclusion, if you other, to use that trendy phrase. But if you leave people on the outside and leave people on the margins, you know,
Yeah, I think
it's not a smart way to operate.
yeah, I think it's the beginning of something that ends terribly. It struck me, myself, my wife were in Prague, and I remember we walked down this road. It was a beautiful sunny day, and we sat and had a coffee in this coffee shop, and I could see this something glimmering, sparkling on the street. And then I could see a couple of them as the angle of the sun moved. And when we finished our coffee, I walked up the street, and anyone who's been to Prague or to a lot of German cities will know this, that on front of the door was a little brass plaque, and it was the names of the family of the Jewish families that had been removed from those houses and had ended up in concentration camps. So I think, you know, ultimately that's what fascism and that's what Nazism led to. But it didn't start with that. You know, it started with excluding people, I think, and treating people differently. So I'd concur with that. Speaking of being different, Mary Lou, one of the things that struck me when I was doing my legal stalking, like, you're a Rathgar girl, and you're a Notre Dame girl. And, you know, a couple of summers back, I was lucky enough to do a black taxi tour of Belfast. And, you know, one of the things that strikes me in preparation for this, like, there's a fair gap in realities between, say, the Divis Flats or the Falls and Rathgar. How did this passion for, particularly, I mean, you have a great affinity to for your colleagues in the North and for Northern Ireland. I know it's an integral part of Sinn Féin's history and policies. And how did that love of the North and how did that affinity come about? Because it's, like I say, they're two different universes, you know?
They are, for sure, and absolutely. And I can remember many of my first trips to Belfast, and just how different it is, because even by comparison with inner city parts of Dublin, it's different again. So absolutely, you're right to say that. You see, I see it slightly differently. Like, my politics, I think, comes from a love of people and a love of Ireland. So it's not some kind of fetishization or some fixation with necessarily the northern 6 northeastern counties of Ireland. It's a wider question, of course, focusing on what happened in the northern state and all of the injustices and so on that were perpetrated there. But the issue of the North is a question for all of Ireland, because our country is partitioned, because we were colonised, because we suffered at the hands of an imperial regime, and the scars of that are with us yet. So that was kind of my starting point. And I mean, I've said this before, and I'm sure in your legal stalking, you have seen where, you know, when I was a kid, I remember the hunger strikes. Imagine that's 40 years this year. You know, all of those prison protests. I mean, that was the first time I, as a kid in Dublin, saw this. This was beamed into your house. And I said, what's that? And of course, my mother in particular was political, in as much as she followed everything and took an interest in everything. So that was the first moment where I said, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And I guess it grew from that, and the decision to be part of Sinn Féin, even though my family by tradition would be kind of old Fianna Fáilers, you know, anti-treaty, civil war, you know, all of that gig. But for me, the choice of Sinn Féin was very much wrapped up in kind of Ireland, the future for Ireland, reunification and social justice, because you can't have one without the other. They're both inextricably linked. And then I just say this, Jude, this is just more reflection. You see, I think sometimes we presume that because somebody grew up in a particular neighbourhood, or because somebody is very well educated, and I'm lucky that I have had the advantage. If I have any advantage, and the advantage that I have had in my life is that I got a very, very good education, for which I am eternally appreciative. But it's a mistake to imagine that because you have those things, or because you're from a particular place, that you will automatically think in a particular way. sometimes I feel like I nearly have to defend middle class people everywhere in saying to be middle class does not mean that you're socially, divisive or greedy just for yourself. Like I think that people are basically decent and fair. I think most people are fair, and I'm not unique in coming from a background that was not the Davis Flats or Belfast and being a very strong Republican. Although I accept certainly when I came into view as a potential leader and then became the leader of Sinn Féin, of course there is a world of a difference between Jerry and me. Of course there is. Do you know what I mean? Generationally, geographically. We're also very similar in many ways, but we're we come from very different experiences. But I think that's the great beauty of the political party and the political movement that we're in.
Do you know, when I, like I say, in preparation, I would tell people I've such and such a guest coming on, and they give me their gut reaction, and yourself and God, I don't want to put you now in the same category in case you close off the call, but yourself and Michael Healy-Rae stimulated the same passions. I will say 90% of the first week, half the week, people said, "Oh, Mary Lou, I love her. She'd be brilliant. She's fantastic." And I equally had people who went, "Oh, that one," right? And I equally had, but poor Michael Healy-Rae, I think, got a worse dose because everyone was like, "Oh, geez, him and his hat." And I said, "What do you know about him?" And they said, "Nothing." And actually, a couple of people came back to me, having listened to Michael on the podcast, said, "God, he's a very clever man. He's a shrewd man." And I said, "Yeah, of course he is." But my question is this, Mary Lou, do you find it difficult? Like, somebody said to me, who would I vote for? And I have voted Sinn Féin, I voted Fianna Fáil. Like, I tend to vote locally on, who's a good representative or who's going to work hard for the area I live in. But do you find it difficult to deal with the fact that sometimes people, like you say, are of a mindset, "Oh, that's Sinn Féin, that's Mary Lou. No, I've nothing to do with her. Don't want to listen to her. Don't care what she says. Don't care how much money she saves the money. Don't care if she fixed the housing crisis. If she fixed the health service, I wouldn't give her a vote." Do you find it difficult to deal with negativity?
No, not at all. And look, you have to be realistic about these things, Andy. If you put yourself into the public domain, if you put yourself up for public office and for election, and if you go into the marketplace of ideas, you have to accept as a matter of objective reality, unless something extraordinary happens, you're not going to get a 100% hit rate.
Yeah.
And just because there are people who passionately share your beliefs and who will back you to the hilt and think there's no one like you, there will be other people who will be skeptical, unconvinced. There'll be other people who just don't like you. And do you know what? I'm actually quite relaxed on. There is no obligation on people to automatically like you. I'm quite comfortable with that. And in fact, I have found in my life very often the most interesting and rewarding of conversations are with the skeptics or even the opponents, or people who have built up an idea of you that may or may not tally with the reality when they're actually looking you in the white of your eye and when you actually get to talk to them.
Yeah.
So, but all of that is what makes kind of politics, I suppose, a bit like sport. Competitive, combative at times. You
clearly love it. You clearly feast
but
on it.
I'm just saying, I'm personally very relaxed, and I have no notion about myself, and that I'm some wonderful person that everybody has to kind of like immediately, be, entranced by. I've no such notion. I know that you win respect, you win trust. And then sometimes there are ideas that I have that some people just don't agree with. And do you know what? You agree to disagree. And I'm okay with that too.
What strikes me as leader of the opposition, I saw actually today that Mary Butler announced there was mental health services here in the southeast where there was a unit being opened. But someone remarked to me that David Cullinane congratulated her and thanked her for putting in the work for, the service being available. Is it hard being opposition leader in that? Are you expected to knock and be negative constantly? Do you ever find yourself in the Dáil and you want to stand up and go, "Well done, Micheál, fair play, that was deadly"? But do you feel as opposition leader sometimes, are you expected to be, the opposition? Are you expected to be that critic constantly? and to be, I understand the logic that you have to be seen as a separate entity and as a real opposition, not just somebody sitting in the seats. But is it difficult sometimes to, you know, do you ever find yourself tempted to say that, like, well done, that was brilliant? Or are you?
I mean, there are moments where, not just with this government, but previous governments, where I have said well done, and I have meant it, by the way, and where you have a job well done and where there has been a good result. Why wouldn't you acknowledge it? It's very, very important to do that. I'm conscious, however, that sometimes, as and when you do that, you will have some people who will respond badly to that and say, well, what the hell are you at? You're supposed to be the opposition. But look, it's a case of striking the balance correctly, because where something has worked, or where you have common cause. Let me give you an example. So, because it's probably easier to make it more concrete. So not long before the Dáil rose in this term, a piece of legislation was scheduled to come through the Dáil to extend supports for business because of COVID. We were all for that because that needed to happen. It was eminently sensible and necessary and, in fact, urgent. So as the opposition, as leader of the opposition, we're saying to those measures, absolutely correct move, and we will back that 100%. But at the last minute, the government introduced an amendment which had nothing whatsoever to do with business supports and had everything to do with giving big, greedy international funds the opportunity to buy up houses in the Irish market and then lease them back to local authorities. Crazy stuff, madness. And we are very, very much opposed to that. We will not stand idly by, as they say, and watch them make the same mistakes in housing again and again and again and not challenge them. So there's, within one legislative move, if you like, and the two bits of opposition. On the one hand, yes, the business stuff was essential. And on the other hand, they, in a very, very sneaky, sleeving, I would say, manner, tried to sneak in this amendment, which was crazy stuff, exactly bad policy, the opposite of what we should be doing in housing. So we voted against that legislation. I mean, not because we don't want support for businesses, but because we cannot stand over, you know, a situation where vulture funds, cuckoo funds, choose your bird, call them whatever you want, but that they get big tax advantages, sweetheart deals, and still we can't house our people. A whole generation can't really have a prospect now of owning their home. And so many, many others struggle, like incredible struggles just to make their rent. So there's the two sides of opposition, because you do have to be constructive. Nobody wants to listen to somebody perpetually moaning. That's fair enough. But at the same time, nobody wants an opposition that's milk and water and that won't actually speak truth to power and that won't say to the government, when they're obviously making a hash of something again, that they are making a hash of this thing again. And it's all about striking those balances. And sometimes in the public mind, you get that balance right. Other times you get it wrong. But every time we are very aware that we are the voice of hundreds of thousands of people who really did want us to be in government, and lots of whom are really disappointed that we didn't make it last time, and who want, in any event, people in the most powerful positions in the state who make decisions that affect your life, my life, our children's lives, our neighbours' lives. They want them held to account, and we'll never wimp out on that. We have to do that. Some people say that's negative. I'm not sure I accept that. I think that's called doing your job, from my perspective.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the job of the opposition. I think too, what people leave out of the equation is what you see in media is very much controlled and presented. You know, like if I drop the microphone here now, or if the camera falls off the laptop, you won't see that on YouTube because it'll be edited out and it'll be nice. There'll be nice music and I think there's an element of that too, and that what we see in the Dáil is what's, you know, it's not necessarily I'm one of these sad people. I watch Oireachtas report. I'm coming out. I shouldn't say this. I know I shouldn't say it. I bizarrely like watching special committees, but anyway, but what we see on TV isn't always the reality. When I was talking to someone about you coming on and that idea of the opposition, the same person said to me, do you know what you should ask Mary Lou? If you had to sit down for an afternoon and have a couple of pints with someone who wasn't in Sinn Féin, who's good crack in the Dáil? Whose company do you enjoy, or who would you be able to survive an afternoon with a bit of crack and have a pint with?
Oh my God, yeah. I would say, with lots of people here. Now, I'm not a frequenter of the Dáil bar or the Shebeen, as it was revealed, the big reveal. So, but I mean, who would? I very much like John McGuinness. He was the chairman of the PAC committee when I was on it. He's an absolute devil.
Yeah.
And I think he's great crack. But there's any number of people across politics that you kind of hit it off with. Now, I'm not going to pretend that they would be my go-to people for a night of cocktails.
Yeah,
they wouldn't. But
if you on that Friday evening you come home, and I'm painting this picture for people listening to the podcast. So you've got your onesies on and your fluffy slippers. My daughter particularly wants to ask you, like, what's your dirty takeaway? What's your guilty sin? So you're sitting on the couch, the calories are gone out the window, the HSC healthy live. What are you burying yourself into? And would you watch Love Island while you ate it? Now, and I'm sorry to go from our lofty aspirations of an Irish future republic to fluffy slippers and takeaway, but what's the takeaway? And would you watch Love Island? There you go.
Let me start with the Love Island. Now, I just, to all Love Island lovers everywhere, I profoundly apologise. But I turned it on for about 10 minutes and two youngsters were milling into each other. I was like, holy mother of God. It would not be my thing. Maybe you need to stick with it. I'm told it's about relationships and good relationships and all of it. I'm not really buying that. I just think it's kids in bikinis milling into each other. So that's not really my program. But as to the more intriguing part of the question, the takeaway, one of my really sinful foods that I love ice cream.
Are we going with a particular flavour?
Any flavour. I mean, I could eat all the ice cream in the world. I love ice cream. Takeaway food, I'm kind of a bit on, Chinese, if it came to it, or a Thai, or we have a very nice, we have an Argentinian kind of takeaway close to our house, which is lovely. But I wouldn't be a big takeaway food person. Yeah. But like, you're saying calories out the window, what do you really like? I like ice cream, like more than chocolate or anything like that.
Okay, we'll see. I'm sure we can get someone listening to this, some sponsorship deal going for you. We can get
Ben and
Jerry's, and you'll probably want it in mango, vanilla, what am I going, green, white and gold. You'll probably want it in some combination of that for extra taste. My son was trapped in Germany due to COVID. He came home last night for the first time in a year. But it's funny, I picked him up in Dublin airport and I said, what would you like? Where we go? He said, I want chips. I said, what kind of chips you want? He said, I want fat, dirty chips, greasy ones, dripping in brown paper bag with litres of vinegar. So we proceeded to eat a trough full last night, which results in everyone feeling really unwell today, that horrible poisoned feeling. Mary Lou, I've asked a lot of the guests, there's only one, I suppose, common question I've asked everyone. It's this, I know you're a child of the 80s like myself, and you spoke there about the hunger strikes. I have clear memory. I would have been in first year in secondary school, so I do remember the black flags. I do remember Smash, H Block everywhere. And I remember, for me, it was the beginning of awakening to politics and to, what was happening in Ireland at the time. But at that time, there was a marvelous film, Michael J. Fox, Back to the Future. And you get into the car and you hit 88 miles per hour, and off you go in your DeLorean, and you can travel to any date or time. So I've asked all of the guests, if I could set your time on the DeLorean, if I could set your clock to 88 miles per hour, what date and time would you go back to? And what I mean by that, Mary Lou, is a time in your life where, do you know what, if you could go back and visit for an hour a week or an afternoon, that was when life was simple. Some of the male guests have described football in front of the house on a summer's afternoon when they were 11 or 12 and the game went on for 5 hours and you only came in because your mother called you in or you were sunburnt to a crisp. What can you think of a time in your life where do you know what, I'd love to go back there?
Yeah, and lots of them. Although I think if I had a time machine, I'd be more curious to go to the future than go to the future. Yeah, I suppose I'd have a number of them. I really loved my 30s. just as a decade. I loved being in my 30s. I felt that you were old enough that you were really an adult, but you were still very young. And I had my children. I became a mother in my 30s and actually got elected for the first time, started running for public office in my 30s. So that was a really great decade for me. 40s were a little bit more ropey, but I'm in my 50s now. So hope springs eternal. But if I had to go back, I suppose maybe I'm like the rest of your guests. So maybe it says something about the quality of childhoods in Ireland. Because if I go back to say when I was 9, 10, 11, 12, my memory of childhood is lots of sunshine. Yeah. Our sport of choice was tennis. And, Wimbledon would be on. Christ, we'd be stuck to the telly and then we'd be out, I'm Martina Navratilova, you're Chris Evans. Do you remember Bjorn Borg, Jimmy Conn, John McEnroe, for goodness sake. So all of that. And there was another dimension to my kind of summers as a child, and that is my mother is a Tipperary woman. So we would be packed off on the train down to the Glen, down to the Glen of Aherlow. And really? those summers were magic, absolutely magic. For kids from the city to go down and have the freedom to roam, just fields and forests and cows to be milked and trips to the creamery and Lisfernan Parish Church and the local shuppa and everything. It was just absolutely brilliant. And I'd come back after weeks with Molly, with my grandmother, and that. And of course, I'd have turns of phrase and all of that, which would mean nothing in South County Dublin. They'd be saying, what are you saying? So I'd have to kind of re-acclimatise myself. But those were great times. And there's something kind of never to be repeated, that sense of innocence of being that age, and of kind of whether you're watching, if there's a World Cup on, or as I say, Wimbledon, or the hurling finals, All Ireland Sundays, and the excitement of all of that, and in your head you're part of that drama. I mean, that is the magic of of childhood. So I am going to be in line with the other guests and say, if I was going to go back, I'd have to bypass the 30s and go back to that time. And I think there's something very wonderful when you become a parent yourself. And my kids are that bit bigger now, so they've gone through, but those childhoods, when they'd be out playing and out, and it's a different world now in many ways, but childhood is childhood.
Yeah, there were simple days. I just have had a flashback there. I remember going fishing when I was about 12 with a friend of mine, and I was telling him all about fishing and how do you catch fish, and I'd never caught a fish. And of course, the first time he threw the hook out into Gavin Buckley, if he's listening to this, and the first time he threw out a hook, he caught a fish, and I was disgusted. And I had to pretend to take his fish off the hook and show him how to do it. But as I was doing it, I left my fishing rod hanging over the side of the boat. And after 6 months trying to catch a fish, I'd never caught one. But with the fishing rod hanging over the side of the boat, I caught a fish. And I can remember every tiny detail, but they were simple yet magic times, I like your answer to Mary Lou, where you say you go forward because obviously you want to see what will happen in Ireland and what will happen to you politically. Jarlath O'Regan, I think it was, gave me a very interesting answer. He said, I will graciously refuse your lift in the car. And I said, why? And he said, because those days in my memory are perfect. And he said, maybe if I went back and saw them now as an adult, they weren't quite so perfect and quite so wonderful. He said, I viewed them with childhood eyes, and that's why they're so wonderful. So he said, I'd sit in the car, he said, but I will decline to reach 88 miles per hour, which I thought was a great answer, a really, really great answer. Absolutely. Mary Lou, listen, I'm really conscious of how busy you are. I didn't just say that as a platitude at the start. On your Facebook, Instagram, you're one of the hardest working politicians that I've come across. You absolutely flog yourself. I am in awe. I don't know how you keep going. I wish you all the very, very best for your future. I hope to meet you again sometime in the flesh. Thank you for coming on the Mighty Mini podcast. I really had great intentions of keeping all political sentiment and statement from the interview, but I think that goes to the core, to the smear of your existence. And I think that would be an impossibility for you, because I think you're actually living politics as opposed to doing it as a job. So I think that's why, despite my best intentions, you got to say the important things that you had to say. Mary Lou McDonald, thank you so much for coming on.